Under the blazing lights of Congress, silence cracked like glass when the gavel struck, and all eyes turned toward the front row. The room carried that unmistakable tension, the kind that lives in your bones, where words can break reputations, and silence can speak louder than thunder. Samuel Alito, cloaked not just in his robe but in decades of institutional power, leaned forward with the quiet arrogance of someone who believed the fight was already won. His voice was steady, deliberate, and aimed like a spear at Jasmine Crockett. He wasn't asking questions, he was making accusations. He framed her as unfit, unworthy, a lawyer whose very license should be stripped away for the audacity of challenging men who had written the rules. And for 15 minutes, the nation thought they were watching defeat. Crockett sat still, her eyes lowered, not flinching, not rushing, letting his words roll across the chamber like a storm testing the windows of a house built for endurance. Commentators whispered. Journalists tapped their keyboards in real time, recording what they thought was the unraveling of a young congresswoman's credibility. Alito's words weren't just a critique. They were designed to bury her career under the weight of legal authority. But what no one knew, not the justices, not the lawyers in the back rows, not the cameras streaming live to millions, was that Crockett wasn't silent out of weakness. She was silent because she was holding a fuse. And when she finally lifted her head, the atmosphere shifted. The first words out of her mouth cut through the chamber like a blade dipped in fire. Before you strip my license? Justice Alito, let's strip the lies. The room froze. The reporters stopped typing mid-sentence. Even those who opposed her leaned forward because they could feel that something was about to break open. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flail her arms. She calmly placed a folder on the desk before her, slid a single page forward, and looked directly at Alito. Her silence had bought her time, but her preparation bought her power. That page contained numbers, figures tied to accounts, contracts, and money trails that few dared whisper about. She didn't accuse me. She didn't speculate. She stated, $500 million, $500 million. Not tied to an institution. Not tied to some vague trust, but tied, line by line, to the name Samuel Alito. The room inhaled sharply all at once, like an audience watching a glass fall from a table, but shatter before anyone could catch it. She spoke with the precision of an attorney who knew the law wasn't just about arguments. It was about evidence. She laid out where the money came from, how it moved, who signed off, and where it landed. Every detail was checked, verified, timed to the second. And as she spoke, Alito's face betrayed the first flicker of something rare. Not anger, not arrogance, but recognition. Recognition that the target of his attack had just turned the tables. Crockett wasn't just defending her license. She was putting his integrity on trial in front of the nation. The cameras didn't blink. The networks didn't cut to commercials. Millions of viewers leaned closer to their screens because they understood the gravity. This wasn't just a congressional exchange, it was a moment of reckoning. What she exposed wasn't merely about numbers on paper. It was about power. About whether the highest court in the land could hide behind its robes while money whispered louder than justice. Every line she read raised another question the country had been too afraid to ask. Could a justice rule impartially with this kind of shadow? Could the law survive if trust in the court evaporated? By the time she finished, the silence in the room was different. It wasn't the silence of expectation anymore. It was the silence of impact. No one clapped. No one shouted. No one even moved. They just stared, as though the walls of the chamber had heard something they weren't supposed to. Alito tried to respond. His voice wavered, searching for technicalities, for distractions, but the words fell flat. Against numbers, against documentation, against a congresswoman's resolve, there was nothing left to twist. For once, the robe was not enough to shield him. What unfolded in those minutes was more than a clash between two names. It was a question that reached into the heart of America. Who guards the guardians? And in that moment, millions of people watching from their homes, from their phones, from crowded offices and quiet kitchens, felt something shift. They saw that power was not absolute. They saw that truth, when wielded with precision, could pierce even the thickest walls of authority. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her silence at the beginning had already spoken for her. Her evidence had finished the job, and in that chamber, under the brightest lights in politics, Samuel Alito's attack crumbled not because she shouted louder, but because she proved stronger. The nation wouldn't forget what they had seen. And it was only the beginning. The silence that followed Jasmine Crockett's revelation wasn't empty. It was heavy like the air after a storm when the sky is split, but the thunder still echoes. Every camera stayed locked on her, every microphone straining to catch the smallest shuffle of paper, every reporter frozen with their hands hovering over keyboards, afraid to miss a single word. Across the chamber, some lawmakers leaned back in their seats, eyes wide, as though they had just witnessed history written in ink that couldn't be erased. Others shifted uncomfortably, tugging at collars, whispering to aides who suddenly had no answers. The shock wasn't just about the number she exposed. It was about what it meant. The possibility that a Supreme Court justice, a man who was supposed to be the embodiment of impartial law, could be entangled in a $500 million shadow. Within seconds, the outside world erupted. Social media lit up like wildfire, hashtags climbing to the top of trending charts before Crockett had even finished her statement. Millions of viewers clipped the moment, replaying the instant Alito's composure cracked. Memes, live reactions, even professors of constitutional law were already posting. If true, this changes everything. Inside the chamber, however, the tension was different. You could see the calculation in every face. Members of Congress knew this wasn't just about Crockett defending herself anymore. This was about the integrity of the entire judicial branch. Whispers grew louder. Some demanded the hearing be paused, others insisted it continue. The speaker pounded the gavel, but it could barely cut through the noise, and then finally Alito spoke. His voice, once sharp and commanding, now carried a tremor. He tried to dismiss her claims as misinterpretation, as political theater. He leaned on decades of reputation, on the sanctity of the robe, but the words fell flat in the air. Because the documents were still on the desk. Because the proof was still in front of millions. Because Crockett wasn't blinking, she didn't argue, she didn't raise her voice. She simply pushed another page forward, another connection, another receipt. And each one made the chamber lean further in, as if America itself was watching a fortress crumble brick by brick the time the gavel fell again. Everyone in the room knew something irreversible had happened. This wasn't a hearing anymore. This was an indictment of trust, and Jasmine Crockett had lit the match. The chamber emptied, but the fire had already spread far beyond its walls. By the time Jasmine Crockett stepped outside, the steps of the Capitol were no longer just stone. They were a stage, a battlefield, and a pulpit for a nation demanding answers. Cameras crowded every inch of space, microphones extended like spears, and reporters shouted over each other, their questions sharp, frantic, unrelenting, but it wasn't just Washington. Across America, living rooms, classrooms, coffee shops, and office screens replayed the moment on loop. The clip wasn't a political debate anymore. It was the story everyone was telling, the headline that leapt across time zones, the kind of moment that didn't fade by nightfall, but carved itself into memory. $500 million? Anchors repeated, with disbelief linked to Alito. Analysts filled panel discussions with words like unprecedented, historic, and dangerous. Networks didn't just report, they dissected it. CNN broke it into minute-by-minute analysis. Fox rushed to frame it as an attack on the court. MSNBC plastered Crockett's calm stare across primetime, and independent journalists streamed live reactions that drew millions more. Hashtags surged, hashtag 500 million truth, hashtag Crockett vs. Alito, hashtag judicial crisis. One law professor tweeted, "If these documents are authenticated, the legitimacy of the Supreme Court is officially on trial." Outside the Capitol, the air vibrated with chants. Crowds gathered with signs, their voices echoing across marble steps that once symbolized stability. Some demanded resignation, others demanded investigation, and yet there were those who stood in defense of the robe, insisting no single moment could shake the court's foundation. But the truth was, it already had. Inside the back rooms, phones buzzed nonstop. Lawmakers called emergency meetings, staffers scrambled through files, and aides whispered about impeachment, an unthinkable word now spoken out loud. Emails leaked. Pressure mounted. The Justice Department, the White House, the court itself, every institution felt the weight of Crockett's receipts pressing against their doors, and still, in the eye of the storm, Jasmine Crockett did not waver. No victory speeches, no celebratory interviews. Just the quiet insistence that the documents be examined, authenticated, and judged not by her words, but by the facts on their pages. That silence, that restraint carried louder than any slogan. By nightfall, the clip had crossed oceans. International headlines branded it the $500 million scandal. Parliaments abroad debated whether America's justice system was collapsing under its own hypocrisy. Scholars compared it to Watergate. Activists compared it to a reckoning long overdue. And for the first time in years, the question being asked wasn't about politics. It was about trust. Could Americans still believe in the very court meant to guard their democracy? And as the world demanded answers, Samuel Alito remained silent. Silent not as a judge delivering careful rulings, but as a man cornered. Carrying the weight of 500 million unanswered questions, the marble pillars of the court had always been. Alito's sanctuary cold, immovable, unshaken by the storms of politics. But that night, the stillness of his chambers felt like a cell. Behind closed doors, the justice who once wielded authority with effortless command now faced a silence more suffocating than the roar of protesters outside, his aides whispered. About strategy, legal shields, media statements. Yet every draft, every line, every excuse collapsed under the same immovable weight. The numbers. 500 million. A figure too heavy to bury, too precise to dismiss, Alito picked up the phone, calling allies who once answered before the second ring. Senators, donors, legal scholars. Some picked up, their voices stiff, rehearsed, careful. Others let it ring out, unwilling to be tied to the firestorm now carrying his name. One, more candid than the rest, told him the truth he already knew. Sam, this isn't politics anymore. This is survival. But while Alito scrambled in silence, Jasmine Crockett moved with purpose. Her office became a command center, buzzing with legal experts, financial investigators, and constitutional scholars. What Alito saw as an attack, she treated as an obligation. Every document had to be verified, every claim substantiated. Crockett refused to let the scandal spiral into rumor. She wanted facts. And that commitment to slow, deliberate truth only amplified her power. On Capitol Hill, whispers turned into open conversations. Committee members who once tiptoed around the court's sanctity now raised the unthinkable. Oversight, accountability, even impeachment. The very word impeachment hung in the air like a thunderclap, daring anyone to deny it. Media outlets circled like hawks. CNN prepared a primetime special. Fox plotted counterattacks, framing Crockett as reckless, partisan, and dangerous. But the footage betrayed the spin her calm delivery, her silence before the reveal, her precision in presenting the receipts. It wasn't a partisan brawl. It was a prosecution delivered in plain sight. And then came the leaks. Emails suggesting coordination between Alito and shadow donors. Memos tying financial windfalls to cases he had presided over. Nothing confirmed. But the scent of corruption was too strong, and the press devoured it like blood in the water. Meanwhile, the protests outside the court grew. By the fourth night, the crowd filled the entire avenue, candles glowing against the darkness, chants echoing into the marble that once symbolized permanence. "No one is above law," they shouted. "Receipts don't lie." Inside his chambers, Alito stared at the glow of those candles through the blinds. To him, they weren't lights of hope, they were torches. And for the first time in decades, the robe did not feel like protection. It felt like a target,